I don't want to be up here this morning. I don't really want to do this today. Anyone who attempts to speak for the Spirit from the Bible to a group of people knows we are, in some ways, particularly as pastors, professional hypocrites, at least on one level. I've heard some people say, you should never get up and attempt to speak for God in front of a group unless you feel like you're an exemplar of what you're talking about. The only problem is, if in any way you've tried to open yourself to the Spirit of God and hear from Him and receive some revelation, it's always challenging. Always. This week, when I was spending some time in today's passage, praying through it, seeking what our Creator may have to say, I was uncomfortable. So uncomfortable, I had to go over to my wife and sit down and ask her to forgive me for some things. Now, I can't speak for the rest of you who are married, but I've been married over 20 years. I'm still not really good at the asking for forgiveness thing. I think if some of my family members and close friends were to hear me speaking on today's theme, they would say, why did they ask Brian to talk about this stuff? Well, we're in our second week in our series in the New Testament letter of Galatians. We're calling this series, God is Bigger Than Your Background. And here in this New Testament book, St. Paul is reminding us that our Creator is not just like us, only more powerful and a little bit nicer. But that our Creator, who is pure love, pure goodness, pure beauty, is actually so much better and so much more different from us than we can imagine. And therefore, we should expect that if we are open to His Spirit, that we will hear things, sense things, receive things that maybe seem a little silly or even ridiculous to us at times. Because His ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are not our thoughts. When I wrap up here in a little bit, we're going to spend some time interacting together. So if you have a question or a comment, or if you want to let me know how you think I was wrong this morning, we will have time for that. Someone will come around with a microphone. So just hold on to that question or comment. But what we find from our Creator in the Scriptures is so different from us. Let me give you a little example. For us 21st century Americans, when we think about the good life, when we think about what we would like our life to be like if all of our dreams come true, it's normally some kind of mashup of pleasure and comfort, right? I mean, if life is going well, if our dreams are coming true, it means something like more trips to Carmel, better bourbon, more laughs with an attractive lover who just really digs us. And if that's not exactly the kind of thing you're seeking, it's at least meaning a comfortable life with our friends and family and people that we care about. We imagine our parents telling us how proud they are of us. We imagine our children always being thankful for our guidance and what we sacrifice for them. We imagine maybe our significant other always being supportive. Though this tends to be in the back of our hearts and minds as 21st century Americans, the question is, how well is that working out for you? Seeking or hoping for a life of pleasure or comfort. Finding the perfect soulmate, getting your buzz on, getting your children to act exactly as you hope they would. God knows I spent plenty of my life seeking pleasure or comfort, and I can't speak for you, but for me, it never ended well. There's morning headaches and regret. There's apology tours with ex-girlfriends. There's feeling bad for making mom cry. Maybe you found that out too at some point in your life. The ancient nation of Israel knew this. They knew it wasn't a good idea to seek a life of pleasure and comfort. God had called them to a very different path than most people. They knew the right thing was to treat women and children with respect, to stand for what is good and for just among the nations, to call others to live for what's right and not simply what's pleasurable or comfortable. And maybe that's why you took one of your couple of days off and got up early in the morning to show up here. Because you know it's also not best for you to live for what's pleasurable or comfortable. You're here because you want to stay sober. You're here because you want to be with a group of people that fight for the poor. You're here because you want to be on the right side of history. And that's why today's passage, at least for me, is incredibly difficult and uncomfortable. Again, St. Paul's letter to the church at Galatia, chapter 2, beginning in verse 11, says, when Cephas, and this is another name for St. Peter, so remember, this is a foundation of the early Jesus movement he's talking about, someone who wrote part of the Bible. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. Certain men came from James. When they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, for the people who were not part of the nation of Israel, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy, even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, again St. Peter, in front of them, how is it that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? We who are Jews by birth and not sinful Gentiles know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. Remember, first century Palestinian Jewish people were trying to live for what was right and not simply following what was pleasurable or comfortable, like the other Gentiles. In their day, most men took advantage of temple prostitutes. First century Jews did not participate. The rich people owned and mistreated slaves. And they said, no, this is not our way. The powerful were squeezing the poor. First century Jewish people said, this is wrong. This is not what we do. They tried to stand for what was right, and therefore they followed the law as revealed to them by God, seeking to do what is right and calling everyone else to do the same. And so Cephas, or St. Peter, is not hanging out with the Gentiles. He wants his friends to know where he stands on what is right and what is wrong. He wants it to be clear what he thinks people are called to do to be good, moral people that are not simply living for their own pleasures or comforts. And yet, Paul calls him out. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. He says they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel. I think we could say, at least this morning, that there's maybe 3 different visions of what is a good life, or living well, or living your best life, if you want to use that language. First one we already mentioned, the pursuit of pleasure and comfort. Enjoy yourself and have a good time as much as you can. That's probably most people. The second one, standing for what is right, doing the hard, good thing, and seeking to change the world for the better. My guess is, maybe not all of us, but that's probably a lot of us here. But then there's a third one. The gospel, the way of Jesus. Allowing God's love and beauty to overcome and channel through you. Now, it might seem that doing the hard right thing and calling others to the same and the way of Jesus are one and the same. But I don't think that's exactly the case. Standing for what's right or living a life of self-denial and calling others to it is certainly better than using other people to make you feel good or feel better or for your own purposes. But the way of Jesus is allowing his character, God's way of being, to flow through us. And this includes welcoming and caring for people who are not standing for what's right. It's better to do what's right than use people. But Paul says what's even better is allowing the Spirit of Jesus to channel through us, which means being kind to people who we know are wrong. Familiar words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 5. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that, the people that take advantage of others? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Friends, if this doesn't seem at least slightly ridiculous, you don't understand what Jesus is saying. If we are opening ourselves to the Spirit of our Creator, we won't simply seek to do what's right and change the world for the better, but we will be a vessel of God's character, caring for those who we don't believe deserves it. I find this counterintuitive and challenging. If you get it, you will as well. And I want to name 3 ways that if we open ourselves to the Jesus way, we're actually going to feel more uncomfortable. How's that for a sales pitch? Open your life to the ways of Jesus, and it will make you feel more uncomfortable. I don't like it, but I think it's true. Number 1, if you go with the way of Jesus, you will feel misunderstood. You will feel misunderstood. You know, in our highly fragmented, diverse, multicultural world, the way most of us develop a social identity is being clear with what we think is right and what we think is wrong, being clear about who we think is right, and being real clear about who we think is wrong. This is how we signal to people that we should be a part of their group, because we agree with them that this is right, that person's right, and this is wrong, and that person is wrong. But what was Jesus of Nazareth known for more than anything else? Being crucified. And who crucified him? I don't know. Everybody. The Romans crucified him because he wouldn't go with their grand vision for the culture. The Pax Romana, he would not call people to bow the knee to Caesar. He wasn't one of them. But his fellow Jewish people were not happy either. They thought he was too loose, too welcoming, too kind to the evil Gentiles that had been hurting others. They weren't with him either. No one was standing with Jesus. So a question. When is the last time that your own crew, your own peeps, were angry with you? Because you were too kind, too loving to those people. Maybe if you're a suburban business owner, when's the last time your colleagues thought you were too welcoming to undocumented immigrants? If you work for a community nonprofit, when's the last time your people said you're too chummy with those rich Republicans? If you live in a traditional family, when is the last time people said you're awfully welcoming to those who come from alternative family situations? It seems if we go the way of Jesus, even the people who are like us won't always get us. Number two, second way we will be uncomfortable. If you go with the way of Jesus, you will feel like you are taking it too easy on evil people. You're being too kind, too patient. Remember, the Jewish people had been under the boot of the Gentiles for centuries. Their places of worship were attacked by the Romans. Their children went hungry due to their economic policies. Some of their young men had been killed by Roman soldiers. There was a reason Peter wanted it to be very clear to his fellow Jewish friends and neighbors that he was not too light on them. And yet Paul called him out. Paul said, you're not going the way of Jesus. Now, does this mean that right and wrong don't matter? Of course it does. I mean, Jesus had some really harsh things to say about these matters. Things that college-educated people don't tend to do sermons about in church. For example, Matthew 25. Jesus imagines a future, and he says that he will be saying to some people, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire. Ouch. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. It appears that there is a god-awful, rude awakening for those of us who lived lives that were unjust to others, either personally or even systemically at some point in the future. But if you are open to the Spirit of Jesus, you will feel like you are biting your tongue more than you should. That you are holding back more than is necessary. That you are being more kind to people than they deserve. Take just a moment and consider those twisted people that you know are ruining the world right now. I don't have to name who they are. You know who they are. But think about those twisted people that are hurting others and messing everything up. Do you think that they are doing terrible things to other people? Of course not. What do they think they are doing? They think they are doing what's obviously right. What will improve the world? What needs to be done to make everything better? You see, everyone who does evil to other people thinks they are either doing the right thing or they are doing something that is justified and makes sense. Everyone thinks that. But you and I are called to add to the healing of the world and not to the problems. You remember that quote? It's attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, though he didn't really say it. An eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. This is what we are called to keep in mind. Because if all of us are fighting other people because we're doing it for what's right, we will create more and more pain in the world. The only way that we know that we are not adding to that is we feel like we are being too kind, too loving, too helpful to people that we know are wrong. That's the only way we're not part of the problem. Like the crucified Jesus, we will feel like we're too good to people who are doing evil. And number 3, how you'll feel uncomfortable. If you go with the way of Jesus, you will feel like you are personally part of the problem. Again, how's that for a selling point for Jesus? If you follow his path, you will feel like you are part of the problem. This fall, not just me, a whole bunch of people, but certainly me and my friends, listened to a podcast that did a deep dive about a twisted and corrupt and unethical leader. I'm not going to name the podcast, but if I did, some of you would be like, oh, I listened to that one too. Yeah, I listened to that. And this person did a lot of terrible things, but it was riveting. It was like audio TMZ. Every time an episode dropped, the headphones went on, and I listened to the whole thing. But a friend of mine, as we were talking about it, asked kind of a disturbing question. He said, look, I'm not wanting to let that guy off the hook for those things he did. But do you ever stop to think, what would happen if people made a podcast about your life? Like if there were a team of investigative reporters and they went and talked to your old boyfriends and girlfriends and your old coworkers and the people that you went to school with years ago and made fun of and you don't even remember them, or what you put your parents through. If they put a call out on the internet, hey, if anyone's had a problem with this person, come talk to us. We're doing a podcast on them. If they had footage of all your life, if they had access to all the text messages you've ever sent, I'm not sure how I would fare. You know, it's interesting, if you've ever read the Bible, whenever anyone encountered their Creator personally in the Scriptures, it wasn't very pleasant. They didn't enjoy it. Because God's twisted and vengeful and wicked. No, the opposite. God is pure love, pure goodness, pure beauty. Think of the most loving, beautiful being you can, and God is more than that. But when people encountered this God, they realized they weren't like that. And it was painful. The Hebrew prophet Isaiah ended up being sawed in two because of his faith in God. And yet here's what he says. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. He ends up being sawed in two for his faith, but when he saw God, he fell down and was afraid. St. Paul, who we've been talking about today, beheaded by the Romans for his faith. He says, Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. John of Patmos, who ended up exiled alone in a prison and died there, has a revelation of Jesus himself showing up to him. And he says, I turned around to see someone like a son of man, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet, though dead. See, it seems like there's this counterintuitive reality. The more that you and I are distant from our Creator, at least experientially, no matter what we say we believe, but if practically the more we distance ourselves, the more we tend to think we are right. And those people are the problem. But the more we open ourselves to the Spirit of our Creator, it seems that our frailties and our limitations and our personal struggles and our hypocrisies become more clear to us. So again, I've been given a great sales pitch for Christian faith today. But here's a warning. If you like to feel like you're right, if you like to win arguments, don't go the way of Jesus. Because if you open yourself to Him, you'll find yourself asking for forgiveness and feeling uncomfortable about getting in front of people and teaching the Bible. Years ago, when I was back in Pennsylvania, a good friend of mine asked if I would make a personal pastoral visit to someone he went to school with. He said, look, he's kind of alone. He's in a bad place. I think he wants to talk to like a spiritual advisor. Would you go meet with my friend even though he's not a part of the church? And I said, sure. What's the story? Well, he was arrested. Actually, he was a high school principal. Actually, he was sexually abusing a teenage girl. It's kind of been in the news. People have been vandalizing his house. His family's been threatened. So I went to see him. And trust me when I tell you I did not enjoy it. There were times when I left the prison after seeing him where I would get in my car and I would physically be shaking at how uncomfortable I was with him, at how uncomfortable I was with what he did, at how creeped out I was when he would talk about the special relationship he had with the girl that people didn't understand. I didn't want to go see him. But my friend asked me if I would. Again, St. Paul. Cephas stood condemned. He began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, not acting in line with the truth of the gospel. Jesus, love your enemies, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Another friend is asking me, if you will, to live that way towards others. Towards those that I don't agree with. To those who I think have all the wrong views. To those who I think are the problem in our world. I am called to be kind and loving and to bless them even when I think they are wrong. Because God is bigger than my background or my sense of what's right and wrong or what I think should be done or how me and my friends think. And maybe God is bigger than you and your friends as well.